All right, so let me introduce our three distinguished speakers. First is Andrii Zhyvachivskyi, who is a historian of the Ottoman Empire in the modern period. He studied in Ivano-Frankivsk and Warsaw, then moved to Istanbul, where he did some research which was funded by the Turkish government, and I believe we have representatives of the Turkish embassy with us here today, so many thanks to our partners in the Republic of Turkey for supporting this important research. Andrii moved to the United States in 2021 and since then lives in New Jersey, where he teaches history at one of the Ukrainian schools in Philadelphia. Ayla Bakkalli is a Crimean Tatar representative to the United Nations Permanent Council on Indigenous People. Needs no introduction because she has been doing advocacy efforts in the United States for many years now. And Abdul Vahaba, historian, collector, whose exhibition Crimea, Indigenous Culture is on display at the Ukraine House today. He is also an author of the book titled Bakkalli, The Path to Roots. His personal collection of Crimean Tatar artifacts boasts over 1,500 unique items, and we are fortunate to observe some of them here today. So my first question will be to Andrii, as a historian, whom I would ask to give us a little bit of another background of what led to Crimean Tatars' deportation in May 1944.
Thank you so much. So, first of all, I would like to start from the saying that it wasn't the first deportation because we have to remember that Crimean Tatars had their own independent country until the end of 18th century, and the first annexation and the first deportation happened like in 1783. Then during the 18th century, thousands of Crimean Tatars forced to move, nowadays Turkey, and also in the, somebody mentioned today, probably in the movie, that Numan Chelevjihan, the author and the leader of Crimean, the author of national anthem, he was killed by Bolsheviks, and also during that years, after 1917, many Crimean Tatars ran away to nowadays Turkey. Then coming to 1944. So I would like to first also mention my personal experience, because even I'm a historian, I was studying in Ivano-Frankivsk. We didn't have any history about Crimean Tatars, only Islam Hirei III, traitor of Ukraine, and that's it. It's all information. So I was lucky to study with two Crimean Tatar, my colleagues, my good friends, Ayla and Arze, and they were explaining this history. So this day, like 18th of May, since 2007, I visited maybe 5 or 6 times the demonstration in Simferopol. Because, and why I'm telling this, because the word deportatia or surguni Crimean Tatar, it's probably one of the first words that Crimean Tatars mention talking about themselves. Unfortunately, it's a part of their identity. Because there are many Turkic people like Kazakh or Turkish or Azeri, but only Crimean Tatars have this very bad part of identity, because each part of nation was deported. So until 1944, Crimean Tatars had their own autonomy in Soviet Russia, and in the spring of 1944, Nazi left the peninsula. So then Soviets came, as you saw in the movie. Everybody was happy that we have freedom, but it already was planned by Stalin. Probably had plans to attack Turkey. And one of the reasons why he wanted to deport the Crimean Tatars, because among with Crimean Tatars, Chechens and Akhiska Turks or Turk-Messetians and Ingush were also deported in that year. So probably had some plan to have another war. Anyway, so all nation was called as traitors, and during the almost one day, but between 18 and 21st of May 1944, all Crimean Tatars were deported. And also, I have to say that about 35,000 soldiers who were Crimean Tatars were fighting in Soviet army against Nazi. So also it's not true. So first consequences, all Crimean Tatars were deported. Two villages were left in Arabat, how do you call it, in Arabat Strilka, in Arabat Peninsula. And these two villages were totally killed in the day because they just forgot about them and they were deported. So mostly Crimean Tatars were deported to Uzbekistan, about 90%, and some thousands were deported to another oblast of Russian Federation. During the first years of deportation, there are different amounts of losses. Between 20 and 45% of nation were died because of consequences of transportation. They were transported by wagons who were used for animals, so just not comfortable. And also they were pushed to live just outside. So many of them were killed. Also, almost 99% of geographical name in Crimea were totally destroyed. Even now in Ukraine we have discussion about bringing back toponymics. Only Bakhchisarai, because Pushkin wrote a poem about Bakhchisarai, so it means the Palace of Gardens, very nice name, not many people know. And also Jankoy, like the village of Seoul, were kept. Everything was changed. Rivers, also, even Crimean Tatars toponym must be disappear, because Stalin wanted to show that all Tatars were like one. There are, Kazan Tatars and Crimean Tatars, but they are not the same. Let's say it's like Ukrainian's Croatian language is from one family, but not the same. So during the first until 1956, everything about Crimean Tatars must be displaced and changed to Tatar. And also I have to say that in 1950, because many people mention that it's Stalin's regime crime, but even Stalin died. Like Ingush and Chechens were they could come back to their lands, but Crimean Tatars they couldn't come back until 90s. So telling that it's Stalin's regime, it's Soviet regime, Soviet Russia that doing nowadays. Unfortunately, because even after Khrushchev, Brezhnev, they didn't let Crimean Tatars to go back. So the most consequences is almost half of population were died. Also, most educated people died, and that's why now majority of Crimean Tatars they do not know their own language, because if they were scared to speak to their children. Many parents died. So these are the consequences of deportation.
Thank you very much, Andrii. Well, probably it also was part of Stalin's attempt to demonstrate that Crimea was always Russian, because if you destroy and wipe out the history of Crimean Tatar toponymics, even, as you just said, it is through centuries, decades, you can say, well, if there are no Crimean names, it means that it's all Russian, and Russians been in Crimea for many, many centuries before. So that is clearly the strategy of...
It is what Russia is doing always. So, and this is important because in Ukraine before 2022 was discussion not only about Crimea, that why we should change names of the streets, but this is very important. Russia always, when they invade, they always change names, change history. But with Crimean Tatar, it's indigenous. We have to remember it. Indigenous people of Ukraine, indigenous people of Crimea. You cannot, displace, because their own state was there. So wherever you change, history speaks by facts, and facts shows that Crimean Tatars had their. So Stalin even killed many people, even deported them, but Crimean Tatars are alive, and nation is alive and will be.
So this brings me to a second question to Abdul Vahab. How you ensure that your national identity is preserved when you kind of are forced to move, to relocate to a new area and a new culture? How your ancestors supported the language, the flag, the songs? Please tell us maybe some of your personal stories.
Yes, I would like to tell you a bit about our tragic. It's beginning not in 1944. It's beginning the end of 18th century, when our country was destroyed and annexed by Russian Empire. And it was a big country. It was located not only in Crimea, it was east part of Ukraine, it was Kuban, east part of Russia. It also was a territory of Crimean Khanate. And when Russian Empire annexed Crimean Khanate, the first what they did, it's very interesting. They deported all Christians from Crimea. There was a small population, around 5 or 10%. It was Greeks who speak Crimean Tatar language, who had the same culture, same identity, but they was Christian. And it's very interesting. They deported them. It's a Greek from Azov, and they bring there another Christians from different parts of Russian Empire, and to show us and to show history that there was always there the Christian, and they found this problem, like religion problem. There was in Crimean Khanate period, there was no any problems between religion, nation. They created it. They didn't deportate us in the beginning. They deported Christians. It's very interesting. And second thing, what they did, they pushed a lot of Crimean Tatars to move from territory of Crimean Khanate. It's part of Ukraine, as I said, Kuban. And nowadays we have more than 5 million of people who has Crimean Tatar origins, but the most of them, they're already assimilated, unfortunately. They have Crimean Tatar origin, but they don't speak language, they don't keep his culture. They just know that his origins from Crimea. When I worked, I visited different Crimean Tatars communities in different countries. It's just some countries really kept his Crimean Tatar culture. For example, it's Romania, and our communities there, they're very strong. They keep our culture, they keep our language. It's the most important. And about culture. So, from 1783 until 1944, the population of Crimea was reduced from 90% of Crimean Tatars to 25%. And the first tragic, it was the people. They was deported. Around 50% was died. But second thing, what they did, they tried to destroy our culture, history, and even memory. They, as my colleague told, they changed names. The 99% of villages, cities, toponymics of Crimea. They destroyed mosques, libraries, schools, universities. Before deportation, we had. It was part of Russian Soviet. It was a republic in Russian USSR, and we had our language there. We could study in Crimean Tatar, but they all was destroyed after deportation. And Crimean Tatars in Uzbekistan or different other region where it was deported. They was pushed to forget his language, forget his origins, and for example, and even different type of our crafts. We forgot it, unfortunately. Last 30 years, we trying to renovate it, but anyway, 90% of our craft we still didn't renovate it. We're just trying to do it, but it takes a long time because everything was destroyed. a lot of information in my mind. So,
maybe I will ask you
yes, you can
a
go ask
question
something.
that is running in my head. So you say that your collection is 1,500 items, and you brought some part of your collection here. Tell us please a little bit more when you started putting the collection together, what kind of artifacts you have in your collection, and maybe what motivates you, to present all this culture to us today and internationally.
So yeah, 1,500. It was 4 years ago. Now it's already around 5,000 different kind of exhibits, and it's embroidery, it's books, it's handwritten books from period of Crimean Khanate, documents, engravers, and I started my collection in my 16. I just was motivated because I saw that I used to live in Crimea, and I was in different museums, and I visited different cultural places, but there was some collection of Crimean Tatars, but it was minority, and for me it was very interesting. How come we are indigenous people of this land and we don't have our culture? No way. I started to search, and it was interesting that the most important for us things of our documents or books about our country and culture, it was outside of Crimea, outside of our country, and because the things that was in our country, it was destroyed, the most of them. That's why at this period I started to search and buy something. At that period it was not like something important, and day by day I just increased my collection, and now I have around 5,000 different items, and some of them you will see today in my excursion.
We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Andrii, last question to you about the return of Crimean Tatars to Crimea in the early 90s. It was a very interesting process, which was supported by the government of Ukraine a lot. But tell us a little bit more details. Were any challenges associated with the return? Because those people had to start everything basically from scratch. Did they go back to their homes? Whether they were the residents in those homes, so how the government at the national level, at the local level, was trying to resolve all the issues associated with this mass return back home.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So also, I don't want to forget to tell to all my Ukrainians that we have big diaspora in the world, but when I met first Crimean Tatars, they always say we always come back. So and Haytarma, it means to come back, the national dance. So mostly Crimean Tatars, they began to come back in the end of 1980s. But even you saw, maybe it was mentioned in movies, since Stalin death, many Crimean Tatars tried to come back to Crimea. They couldn't get that propiska, registration or stay permit. But anyways, they stayed illegally. So always some small groups were around Crimea. But as you mentioned, the place of Crimean Tatars, thousands of Russians or Ukrainians were pushed by Soviet government to live in Crimea. So also, I think in 1979, he burned himself because he couldn't stay in Crimea. So during the 60s, 70s, it was personal initiatives. Crimean Tatars tried to come back. Some of them, they were lucky, they had some, mostly they were deported back. Other Crimean Tatars, they start to come close to Crimea, like nowadays Kherson region, like Melitopol or Kuban, what was very close to Crimea. For example, the head of Majlis, Rifat Chubaru, he lived in Crimea since 1960s, and he grew up in Crimea. There are some exceptions. but mostly after Soviet Union was almost collapsing, since 1989, Crimean Tatars began to come back. So even Ukrainian government, Ukrainian government for that time, you know, we just also got their independence, and many Crimean Tatars very often tell me that, oh, Ukraine didn't take care about us, didn't help us, and it's true, but from the other hand, you can see now we have war. Ukrainian government, we didn't take care about our issues as well as language. Even I'm making parallels for myself that our languages state, like the law came out in 2019. So also Medlis was recognized in 2014. So yeah, Ukrainian government didn't have at all, but Tatars, and mostly just you have to remember that most of people who were coming back, they actually they were born in Uzbekistan. They had like big dream about this Crimea and telling by their grandparents and their parents. But still, this would always impress me that Crimean Tatars always live. We should come back. I'm talking here with Ukrainian diaspora in America, or I live in Turkey or Poland. There is nothing for Ukrainian. We come back, okay, we sing, we continue to have our dances, but there is no like we should go back. And Crimean Tatars always they say we should come back, and they came back. So maybe in 1990s we remember the word samozahvat. So Crimean Tatars came back. No, they were not welcomed. Russian propaganda said that Crimean Tatars were traitors. They were cooperators of Nazis. So of course, and also just remember that all that people who lived in the houses, they knew that they were Crimean Tatars houses. So maybe 1 or 2% of Crimean Tatars, they could buy their own houses of their parents. Most of them, they build another house, they call it samozahvat, so just came, make some tent, and then by families put their houses wherever they could. And also majority of Crimean Tatars until 1944 they lived in the southern, like the most, let's say, touristic zone, like Yalta, Hurzuf, Sevastopol, Kerch. But now only small amount of them they could buy for very expensive those houses. And also most of Crimean Tatars, and it's also my grandma from mother's side, they were also deported to Siberia. So when they left Siberia, they sell everything very cheap. So Tatars do the same. And majority Crimean Tatars in Uzbekistan, they were bookkeepers, teachers, like high or middle positions. They came back to Crimea and then began to become a constructors or businessmen. People didn't want to give them jobs, so they were struggling all 90s, and even until I can say that something changed maybe in 2005, but according to law, Ukrainian government recognized Medlis as the representative organ of Crimean Tatars in 2014. Ukraine recognized indigenous people, Crimean Tatars, Karims and Krimchak in 2021. And one more law, still we have discussions from the previous president and with this President Poroshenko, President Zelensky, about autonomy of Crimean Tatar. We have to change article number 10 about Crimea. Unfortunately, we need 300 votes, and until now we still do not have the common decision about this. And then 2014, another annexation. So I know personally many people who were young, they came, they sacrificed their jobs just to live in Crimea. They were, as I mentioned, bookkeepers or wherever, they became constructors, and they had hope for their children. And then mostly children, so mostly who left Crimean Peninsula after 2014, they were Crimean Tatars, about 30,000. And for small nation, about 300,000, it's very small amount. And to conclude, also there were some voices of some Ukrainians, or I know in Facebook, in social media, why Crimean Tatar didn't fight in 2014, or why is they not fighting in Ukrainian army? So first, many Crimean Tatars are fighting. I know personally 10 of them who already dead. Of course, they cannot tell about their presence in the Ukrainian army because their relatives are still in Crimea, in occupied Crimea. And also it's small nation, 300,000 people, how many people can fight? And now we have in Ukraine, our society also not ready to, many of people don't ready to fight. But to conclude, as I said in the beginning, that Crimean Tatars always come back, so we have to take example from Crimean Tatars, and this give me not even hope, but I'm sure that Crimea will come back to Ukraine, and Tatars in the end will have their autonomy, their cultural rights, and everything they want. But I don't know when it happens. Will be difficult.
Thank you, Andrii. So, Ayla, you are the advocate. You are the voice of Crimean Tatars in New York. It's the most important international platform where this voice can be heard and raised. First, tell us how you use this voice and what broadly the international community can do to ensure that Crimean Tatars do come back as they always did.
Yes, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I have a loud voice, and plus I have some of my thoughts that I got up early this morning, 6 a.m., and whatever I wrote the day before, I just put it aside and wanted to just make several important points, share them with everyone. I am a Crimean Tatar, 100%. My father was born in Kislev, he's Nogai, one of the 3 sub-ethnic groups, Nogai, Yalaboy, Tat. And so Kislev is Evpatoria, and they are the descendants of Batuhan, and they are also coined as military aristocrats. And my mother is from Karasupazar, which is the valleys of Crimea. So they too were the victims of the deportation in their formative years. So the home was a place of a historical account for us. The memory of Crimea was always seated beside us at breakfast and at dinner. So we grew up with a sense of being Crimean Tatar, even in New York City, even in the US of A. So, but the moment that Ukraine freed itself from the yokes of Soviet Russia, we began our return. So when that happened, of course, we had a lot of exchange of people. So we had Crimean Tatars from here in New York, which was 500 families, go to Crimea, from Crimea, come back. This exchange gave us a sense of a lot of depth of who we were as a people, and that our history was not through books, but we were living history, living through our food, living through the experiences of our parents, of Anai and Bobai. Very precious. And also, and I think looking at the film, of course, I'm so happy we had 2 other speakers before, because I was very emotional with that. And I think advocacy has to do with authenticity. And advocacy has to do with you have to believe. And it has to be you. And so, and the initiative of the Crimean Tatar, in particular the woman initiative, was very prevalent in my home because my father was a very loving person, and we were 4 girls, and he constantly complimented us. had tremendous trust in us. So we had, we grew up as a Crimean Tatar woman with tremendous self-confidence because of our Crimean Tatar father. And so my mother was Karasu Pazar. She was the daughter of a tobacco merchant. And so her last name, her maiden name was Bayele, meaning the daughter of a squire, a daughter of a merchant. Bayele. That she did not toil her living, that she was given by hand. Bayele, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so these cultures were maintained throughout. So as I was, of course, growing up as a Crimean Tatar, I went to New York University, I studied history. And so I gravitated towards Central Asia and gravitated towards Crimea as well. And I graduated and my thesis were on history. And so with plus the educational background and the family component and the cultural component with the identity sealed in, I just sort of gravitated towards advocacy. No one had to tell me, go ahead and advocate. And I felt this sense of responsibility because, you know, my parents also were very vulnerable, just like the film. So, you know, I'm gonna cry just like everyone. And we grew up very fast because we also, as children, took on parent roles. And I tell you something, my father was an amazing man. He felt after the deportation that, you know, he set us in our table and said, you know, we have to find a place where we can put our head in. Evimizi koymaya başımızı koymaya bir yer lazım. In other words, we need to have our own home because we had a very humble lives growing up. And so I was 21 years old at that time. So I said, okay, Baba, let's do that. And so I went out, got my real estate broker's license, and bought a house because we never bought a house before. We didn't know, everything was foreign. So my father, 21 years old, in his hard-earned money, gave me $20,000 as a deposit for a home. Now, if that is not a trust for a woman, a Crimean Tatar woman, I don't know what is. I could have taken that funds, I could have went on vacation, but I didn't. These stories are a profile in what is the authentic Crimean culture is. That in an authentic Crimean culture, an indigenous culture that does not have superfluous layers of other culture, hides the true Crimean Tatar culture. And that could be understood through, in particular, through Crimean Tatar women and through the home. So the trajectory of life eventually, with this confidence of do it all and save Crimea, and as you rightly mentioned, eventually go back home, Evge daughter, towards home, was very much discussed. And so I thought that the advocacy work was an extension of my parents, because my father told he had 4 girls, so we were all 4 sisters, advised us with a very rich legacy, said, do not separate from your community. Cemaatinden ayrılmayınız diye. So I did a lot of volunteer work for the Crimean Tatar. I was a president of the Crimean Tatar Association in New York, a very humble organization, but very live, very energetic. And so that led me to go out and to give talks at different colleges, different campuses. And I graduated from New York University, and under their consortium program, I attended Princeton and Columbia University. So did some brown bag lunching presentations as well. So who was I going to talk about? Friends? No, I was going to talk about myself, about my history, about a Crimean Tatar, and everything through the prism of a Crimea. And that eventually led through many avenues. And I do want to say that Ukraine was very instrumental. The nation of Ukraine was very instrumental in my advocacy work. In New York, the Ukrainian ambassadors, the mission always opened the doors for Crimean Tatars. So when we had the Language Day at the United Nations, it was a time for us to go speak about our Crimean Tatar language. And the 2-week UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues sessions that occurs at the UN was a very good interlocutor between us here and the diaspora and Ukraine itself. And so in that process, there were Crimean Tatar representatives, Meclis representatives, Kurultay, other Crimean Tatars who I prepared side events during this, talking about myriad of issues. Every year they have the 5 thematic topics on culture, on language, on history. So it was an excellent platform, and with the support of the Ukrainian mission, the word of what's happening on Crimea and Crimean Tatars were perfectly contextualized, and the message reached to the highest echelons of audiences. So in that respect, my advocacy was actually very personal.
Wow, what a story. Questions from the audience to our speakers? If not, I will end up on the very important note, I believe, which is about the further promotion of academic knowledge about Ukraine and Crimean Tatars in the United States. It is a project that Ambassador Markarova takes very dear to her heart. We are working on a very important initiative that will probably have another boost towards Ukrainian studies in Ukraine, in the United States. And I'm confident that as a result of these efforts, we will also ensure a further development of Crimean Tatar studies in the United States. I remember during our years as students at Cape Mahila Academy, the book that changed our understanding of our own history was written by a Canadian historian, Orest Subtelny, and I'm now dreaming that there will be another big volume focused solely on the history of Crimea in English, available for the students of the United States who should know the rich history of Crimea, the rich history of Crimean Tatars and other indigenous people of Crimea, and to understand that Crimea is such a beautiful, rich, traditional place that should belong to the entire world. Thank you to our distinguished guests and our speakers. And now we invite everyone to see the exhibit upstairs. Abdul Vahaba will probably create two groups because upstairs it's a little bit tiny. So we'll have a small group now going upstairs. He will personally show you the collection that he has assembled together. And then we will meet downstairs, and the second group will go and see the exhibit itself. We have a social hour with Crimean Tatar sweets and other delicacies. I see a few hands raised. Do you want to ask a question?
So I have a question for Andrii Zhyvachivskyi. Can you tell more about the Crimean Tatar country in the state in 1970 to 1921 during the Crimean Peninsula?
Yeah, so actually this state, it was proclaimed, if I'm not mistaken, 13th of December 1917, and also I will mention that about women. So it was they had constitution where first women had vote. I don't remember in America. You probably get 1960s or 50s, if I'm not mistaken. In Turkey it was so. Crimean Tatars were really like open for women, and women never covered like başörtüsü or hijab, very rare. And also many people know about Ismail Haspinski was Shafika Haspinska, who was providing the women, I think Nesil, women journal in the beginning of 20th century. So about states was proclaimed Crimean People Republic. The head was Mufti Numan. Also, they had few representative women in the main, main council. But so it was proclaimed 13th of 1917, but it was occupied by Bolshevik, I think, in the end of December. So only for 2 weeks. And then Numan was killed 23rd of February 1918. And his body never found it, was thrown in Sevastopol by Bolshevik navies. And about Ukrainian Republic, so with the delegation of Crimean Tatars came to Kyiv and were good relations. But then in the beginning of 1918, Colonel Bolbochan came to Crimea with German forces, and also Crimean Tatars helped. So generally were good relations, but unfortunately, as Ukrainian Republic, also Crimean Tatar Republic didn't stay long because of Bolshevik. And thank you for your question.
Before we close, let me invite Michael Gilbert, who is 11 years old and a student of Ludov Taylor Elementary School, to recite the poem Speak, Father, Speak, authored by Lilia Budjurova, a famous Ukrainian activist, cultural activist, author of several books about Crimea. Michael, mic is yours.
Говори, тато, говори, говори, тато, до зорі, говори про жорстоку війну, говори про той страшний день. Не давай мені, тату, забути, хто я є, таким мені бути, свою мову не дозволь загубити, голос крові поверни мені знову. В моїх венах хай б'ється біда, як солоного моря вода. Нехай п'ються камінням у скроні чорноморського пляжу піски. Пам'ять крові не зможе засити, біль народу неможливо втопити. Говори, тато, про той день, це потрібно й важливо мені. Не жалій мене, не жалій, знову з дому рідного йди, знов втрачай в вагонах коханих, знов рахуй, хто ще є у живих. Я хочу про все розузнати, що внукам твоїм передати. Твій біль, що живе у мені, кожну мить наяву у вісні. Нехай для них стане близьким слово батьківщина і Крим. Говори, тато, говори, говори, тато, до зорі.
So thank you all much for coming. I hope we had a wonderful and very informative and enriching event. Let me invite everyone to continue informally upstairs and downstairs. Thank you to our speakers.
Я хочу сказати, що я маю прапор кримсько-татарський, підписаний на фронті моїм другом лейтенантом, офіцером Ісмаїлом Халіковим із 61-ї бригади. І українською прапор. Дуже
Біля виставки.
всі, так?